Pray for Anita. Okay. What's going on with Manny? Just sick? Okay. Go ahead, Eva. Yep. So, Father, we thank you, Lord, for your love, your mercy, your grace. Lord, I ask that you just be with us this evening. We're thankful for today. Thankful for the blessings that you have put upon us, the breath in our lungs, the great soup that was a surprise. Lord, I'm grateful that you are consistently and constantly working on our behalf. You are always, always working things out for our good. Lord, I ask that you'd be with not only Eva's request, but there's so many people that have unspoken requests, things that we deal with, things that we continuously deal with, things that we've shared with our prayer partners, Lord, that we are fighting, and we're not fighting alone, but Lord, there's just things that are continuously a battle. So Lord, I ask that you'd be with those unspoken requests. Lord, I ask that you'd touch Anita in her body, that you would touch her from the top of her head to the bottom of her toes, Lord, that you would release your healing touch in her limbs, that her knees would work the way that they're supposed to, that all pain and discomfort would leave, and that you, Lord, as the great physician, would give her the healing touch that she needs. Lord, I ask that you would continue to work in this church. Lord, I ask that you'd be with Manny. There's babies. I can think about the urologist and remembering what that was like with Jacelyn. So Lord, I ask that you'd give Jenny and Craig and Kim peace as they traverse that with Manny. Lord, I ask that you would be with us today. Give us wisdom to see, ears to hear, and that we would learn something new. We give you praise, we give you glory. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I'm Mike. So I left this title as Generations because there's a pivotal point here in Genesis chapter 37 that is interesting from everywhere else. And the pivotal point is that the Toledot formula that we've looked at throughout the entire book of Genesis has always focused on Father, Son, Father, Son, Father, Son, Father, Son. So in this Toledot formula that we're about to see, it's interesting because it goes from fathers, sons, and it starts to break off to this point to where we get the 12 tribes that will inevitably make up the nation of Israel. So just kind of interesting. It's stuck, Joe. Bring it forward. So Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. You see how it says that? So it's not a one son, it's the generations. But then at the same time, because of the way that Genesis is written, it focuses first on Joseph, because typically within that formula, it would give you father, then who? Oldest. So now we're going here to Joseph because it's pointing out within Genesis that we are going to follow Joseph on his sojourning or on the journey that he's about to take. So he says, these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. There was no shalom, is what the Hebrew says. So therefore, grumbling consistently. Now I want to be clear here. What does it say up there in verse 2? It says, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. I'm just pointing it out there. I mean, I want you to think about this. He was. He's definitely a spoiled brat here. You know what? My kids used to tell on each other consistently and constantly, and it got to a point that I actually started punishing the one that was tattling. Because I told them, now listen, I was like I told Josiah, he's back there and he may or may not remember this. He used to tell on his brother for everything. And then it would be a conversation that I had with his brother, but I mean, some of those things I just didn't want to know. And some things I may or may not want or may know, but I mean, we were already pretty protective and check everything and follow them and look for vault apps. If anybody has a question on that, come see me because I'm very skilled in breaking the phone open to find vault apps. So I mean, it's not like that we're not monitoring our children anyway. So I remember having a conversation with him and Jeremiah, like, listen, one day I'm going to be dead. I think Jeremiah was maybe like in 8th grade then, 9th grade. One day I will die. Your mom will die. And they're looking at me. I remember Josiah's in like 4th grade. Good grief, this is a macabre conversation. And the only one you're going to have when I die and your mom dies is each other. And if you continue to lay down this foundation where you fight like this consistently, you ain't going to have each other. Because you're going to grow up and you're going to continue to grow in hatred toward one another, like some siblings I know, or distaste for one another, and things will happen in haste, right? So it's kind of like, have you ever seen Hacksaw Ridge? All right, so Desmond Doss is in that movie. Him and his brother, they fight all the time. And one of the things that turned his thoughts in the movie or in real life too is that him and his brother got into a fist fight one day, and in a heat of rage, he grabbed a brick and busted it across his brother's face. So in the heat of rage, that's what happened, the original sin, right? So in what's happening here is we get this built up in this original type sin where Joseph is rubbing it in. He's like, I'm going to go tell on you, oh, you 17, and I'm going to tattle on my brothers. So they're already irritating with him. Continues on here in verse 5. It says, now Joseph had a dream. Oh, yeah. Yes. Something like that. Yep. And the thing that we have to realize is that they are together, but they've also started to spread out. And we'll see that in the next chapter where Judah actually like goes off on his own. So like they're unified, but they're spreading out. If that makes sense. They're settling the land. So now Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright, and behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. His brother said to him, Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Now, I want to be clear here. In the Hebrew, this is like agging. I want to make sure that you understand this. This is like Jacob getting up in the morning, coming downstairs for breakfast, and saying, Guess what dream I had last night? All of you bow down to me. So that you're clear. I was going to show the Hanna-Barbera cartoon from this, but it sounds like, like they're inquisitive or something. And Jacob's like, I don't know why or Joseph's like, I don't know how I'm having these dreams. No. And the way that this is laid out, the way Moses wrote this and intended it to be read, is that he is literally bragging about this. Like a 17-year-old brat. Now, that does not justify what happens. I'm just laying it out so you understand why his brothers really hated him. So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream, and he told it to his brothers. And he said, Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. But when he told it to his father and his brothers, now you have something happen here that's unique. Because this is the same place. It's not, I had this dream. What do you think it means? See, that's the interesting part, is that these dreams that Joseph are having, he knows what they mean. So he's interpreting the dreams, and then he's bragging about it. You understand that? What's happening here? He understands what the dreams mean, and then he's coming and he's telling them, guess what? Behold, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars were bowing down to me. So what that's insinuating is this. The son, who do you think that he's talking about? The father. He's talking about all the mothers and all of his brothers. Basically, he's saying everybody in this family is going to bow down to me. Could you imagine if your son came downstairs to the breakfast table, and he's like, guess what? I had a dream last night, and I'm going to rule you, man. That probably would not go over well. So at this point, Jacob rebukes him and said to him, What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you? And his brothers were jealous of him. So his brothers were jealous, but his father kept the saying in mind. What do you think that's happening there? Yeah. Just because we get something from God, though, Dan, doesn't mean that we should deliver it in that way. But the last verse there where it says, but his father kept the saying in mind. Oh, yeah. I think that the way that Moses has written this is just a little bit more. Think about the way that how did Jacob get his blessing? He wrestled it. He wrestled with his brother. He went and all the things that went on. Now all of a sudden, his son's coming to him and telling him, I had a dream that you're going to bow down to me. So now he's like in mind, it's almost like, okay, I love this boy, and he's my favorite. He's vying for my place. Which is interesting. Only interesting because of what we're about to see happen here with the language that's used and the way that it's worded. It is reminiscent of what Jacob did to Isaac. So what Jacob did to his dad, his boys are about to do to him. So in verse 12 it says, Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. So it's interesting that like 2 years beforehand, that in Shechem, they had just like literally demolished all of the men there when they convinced them to get circumcised. And remember how they were really upset? So there's a lot of theologians that are like asking a lot of questions into why they would be near Shechem after that. The overall consensus is that by this time they found out that their sister was raped. So even the people in Canaan say that it was a legitimate excuse for them to do what they did. Kind of seems a little extreme, but that's how they lived. So they're free again, and we're going to see that it's very safe, or somewhat safe. So in Israel right here, because what happens here, so Israel says to Joseph, Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them. And he said to him, Here I am. So he said to him, Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and the flock, and bring me a word. So he sent him to the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem, and a man found him wandering in the fields, and the man asked him, What are you seeking? I am seeking my brothers, he said. Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock. And the man said, They have gone away, for I heard them say, Let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan, which is 13 more miles on foot. So whatever happened, we know what happened at Shechem, but like the reasons why it's safe again, we don't know. We can speculate all the different things. But here we have Joseph with them, and I'm assuming he's got slaves and supplies and so on. So, questions or thoughts on why they would be near Shechem? What do you think, Becky? I don't think so. I think that his dad thought that, my boys are going to do what I tell them to do. But, you think he'd be a little foolish considering the fact that Reuben had just did what Reuben did with Bilhah. So you think he'd be a little worried because Reuben had just tried to usurp authority too. So I think that his dad was over-trusting of how angry his brothers were with him, which would make sense as to how Jacob had thought. I mean, he's kind of that everything's going to work out kind of guy once he, he didn't get upset about his daughter being raped. He did it. You know what I mean? He's not being a very interactive father. I'll tell you that. So, by the way, if somebody raped my daughter, you have to get me out of jail. Just heads up. And that went out. Everybody online just heard me say that. So in Indiana, fair warning. That's right. In Indiana, if for just plain assault, it's a $50. So if I only hit them once, it's $50 to get out of jail. One of you will owe me $50 because it's only going to take one hit. I promise. So yeah, that's it. One hit. So he finds them at Dothan. So they did, but well, I was reading today. They're talking about the Canaanites when back in 2 chapters ago or 3 chapters ago when that happened, that the Canaanites were like really upset because they were all unified. So the overall consensus is that they would have moved into the city. It's kind of like all this prime real estate going to waste. In similar kind of ways when Joshua comes in and they begin to retake Canaan, they retake the promised land, and they literally take the vineyards and the houses, and so the consensus is that basically at some point the Canaanites say, well, they deserved it. Yeah, and look what we got. Yeah, I'm sure. So they saw him from afar. So you have Joseph walking to Dothan in this bright, bright coat that sticks out like a neon light. And his brothers can see that he's coming because it's kind of flat in that area. And they can see him coming from a long way out. I don't know if visibility is 2 miles or whatever, but you get this idea that they see him coming and they say, look, there's Joseph, and he's all by himself. And before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. So basically, what's happening here is this. You ready? What Jerry just said is right. Where Jacob is like, I'm hearing these dreams. I believe that my son is having visions from God. And if Jacob believes that his son is having visions from God, then what will happen to the brothers? Because Jacob's literally walking around with a limp from seeing God, right? Wrestling with God. Having God literally touch his hip, so he's walking around with that limp. So now all of a sudden, if Dad thinks that our brother's hearing from God, even though it angers us because of what the ramifications are that God is saying and how the 17-year-old spoiled brat is laying it down. I mean, could you imagine? He's like laying, I'm going to rule over you. That would get annoying every day. So what they're saying here is this. If we kill him, then we take all of that away and nothing that God has told him will come to be. That's terrifying. Sure. I don't think I want Jacob's blessings. We're going to read that at the end. I don't think I want those blessings. So it's come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, let us not take his life. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father. So at this point, Reuben's being a brother. He's the eldest, and he, for the first time, and it's interesting because a couple chapters ago, he's trying to usurp authority from his dad, probably in that, like, I'm a man, look at me mode. And here he is now, older and wiser, like Jerry said, probably 40. Older, wiser, seeing what's going on, and he's like, no, we're not going to kill our brother. That's not going to happen. So now he's actually trying to do what's right, and we're going to continue into that. So I'll read that, then I'll explain. So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore. They took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. Think about this. They strip him of his clothes. They throw him into a cistern or a pit. The consistency is that it's a cistern, something that was dug to hold water. There's no water in it because it hasn't rained. And then after they violently throw their little brother in there, they say, it's about soup time, right? No feelings at all. And we know from Joseph's interaction with his brothers when he reveals himself in the coming, at the end of when they come and they're buying grain, and we're going to get into all of that in the coming weeks, that he says that I begged you. So it's not just like this like, all right, he's like, oh my goodness. No, he's begging for mercy. He's asking his brothers to let him go. He's begging his brothers. And they have committed. They're committed to seeing this all the way through. And they throw him into the cistern or the dry well. Then they sit down to eat. What do you think about that? Like, I mean, do you understand how angry you have to? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, it comes down to, like I said, snotty teenage brat telling on his adult brothers and then rubbing it in their face that I'm going to rule over you one day. That would get annoying really quick. So I get that, but I still don't. It doesn't justify what they've done, and I think it's cold. Like they literally are separating themselves from all emotional connection with their brother. He's no different to them than a stranger. And you'll see that in the way that they address their father at the end of this chapter. So at this point, it's like, he's just like a slave kid. He's nothing. Everything. Yep. Dad didn't do anything. So here's an interesting thing for you to keep in mind here in verse 25, after it says that they sat down to eat. They look up and they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. It's referred to a lot of times as Ishmaelites or Midianites, and they're typically, in this context, they're probably the same kind of tribe. Basically, it's nomadic. They keep on moving around. But what's interesting is right here where they see this kind of train of people that are coming, and they have that balm of Gilead, or the Gilead, or the things that are made there for healing and different stuff that's going to Egypt. Later on, when they go to Egypt to barter with Egypt for grain, that's what they take. So it's kind of interesting that Joseph is taken with the same thing that's going to be brought to buy for salvation. So it's just a kind of interesting foreshadow. So the caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing gum, balm, and myrrh, on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood?" So now, in English terms, like when I say no profit, I'm getting my money. If we just kill him, the blood's on us. But hey, people get stolen all the time, Louis. We'll just sell him off. We'll make some money out of this. He's not going to die. He'll still be alive. That's not on our hands at all. So Judah's reasoning to lessen it, well, we won't kill him. We'll just send him off. Later on in Levitical law, this is just as bad. Oh, Judah. Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. Listen to that. Separate ourselves from him. For he's our brother, he's our flesh, and his brothers listen to him. Then the Midianite, remember what I said, same tribe, Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up, lifted him out of the pit, and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. So 20 shekels of silver was like a normal pay back then for a slave boy. So they don't get anything extra. What do you think of that? Remember how they were separating themselves from him, but then suddenly when they thought they could gain something from him, and his argument, well, let's not kill him, he's our brother. We should just sell him. It's awful. Yeah. And he's justifying it as a good action. We'll have money in our pocket, and his blood won't be on our hands. But yet, is his blood still on their hands? Yeah. And here's the thing is like we all know the story, and as we tear it apart in the coming weeks, we know that God uses the mess to make the message, and that inevitably this is in God's plan, right? But here, let me throw this out to you. Ready for this? But could have God done what he did a different way? One that didn't involve all of this sin? Absolutely. Oh, I understand what you're saying. He does. Yes. No. I think that, when we read this and we think about God knows their hearts. And unfortunately, he knows when the scenario is laid down, this is what's going to happen. And all of the things that laid out to be, it's kind of like he knows the road for both angles. And I think that we have to really look at this and realize that God could have used Joseph in the same way to save his brothers and family, but it wasn't going to it was always going to be this way because of the hearts of his brothers. It doesn't make it right. That's just what God's going to do. The cross is always going to happen because when Christ comes to the world and does what he does in the ministry that he has, it's always going to end up leading to the cross. Doesn't make it right, but that's what happens. So, and in the same way, when God shows Joseph this dream, a 17-year-old cocky boy says, God's got plans for me, and they're going to be for you all to bow down. Start practicing. No. Yes, that's my point. So we could go down some serious rabbit holes in that conversation. So 29. So when Reuben returned to the pit and he saw that Joseph was not in the pit, here we have this. I want to talk about this for a second. So when you leave, you remember when your kids were little and you'd leave and you'd maybe gone for a couple of days and you would say, okay, you're now to the oldest. You got to be the man of the house while I'm gone and help your mom and help with your siblings, and you got to do that. You understand that? You ever heard that before? Like I used to work 4 days. I was gone 4 days a week, and I remember telling Jeremiah, you've got to help your mom because I'm going to be gone for 4 days, and mom's going to need your help, and you've got to be the big boy to make sure that you get Jocelyn and Josiah together, make sure that you take the trash out, make sure that you do these things because he was the oldest by 3 years, so he understood what I was saying. And then I need you to help your mom and be the leader so that she has a little bit of help while I'm gone. So in this way, Reuben suddenly no longer wants his dad's role because he's repentant and he realizes that that's not what I should have done, which is why he's the first one to step up and say, we can't do that to our brother, because Reuben, in this context, is taking upon himself the authority of his dad and saying that I'm out here because our father has put us out here with his sheep, with our family sheep. I'm the oldest and I'm leading you. So in verse 29, when he returns to the pit, he sees Joseph was not in the pit. He tears his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, the boy is gone, and where shall I go? Because he's immediately taking on the reaction of Jacob. So it's like he's come this far in his immaturity to this point of maturity to realize that I'm not my dad, but I've been given authority by my dad to lead my brothers when we're out here, and I just failed, and I am literally repenting, and that's what that motion is, ripping his clothes and saying, what have you done? Unfortunately, fear gets in here too and changes that too. So verse 31, it says, then they took Joseph's robe and they slaughtered a goat. Remember what him and his mom did to their dad. So the interesting part here is that the way this is worded is the exact same way that it's worded when Jacob and Rebekah go and slaughter a goat, put the hair on his neck and get him all readied up to go and deceive his dad. The same way these 11 boys are out here and they're doing the exact same type of thing to deceive their father. So they dipped the robe in the blood, and they sent the robe of many collars and brought it to their father and said, verse 32 right there at the beginning there, it says they sent. So number one, we have to understand here, they're separating themselves away from it. What brother? I never saw my brother. What are you talking about? He wasn't out here. What do you mean? I never saw what happened to him. That's not what we did. So they separate themselves. They send it. So likely they take a slave that's out there with them or a servant, and they send the servant back to their dad with this robe. You see how this is playing out? Number one, they separate themselves from their father by they themselves not going before their father with their guilt. Isn't that interesting? Number two, they separate themselves from their brother so that they themselves will not have to hold the guilt of what they've done to their flesh. By saying, this we have found, please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. Not, is this Joseph or our brothers, but rather, is this your son's? So in this way, they are trying to remember what Judah said. If we do this, his blood won't be on us at all. We'll have no fault in his fate at all. Isn't this crazy? But isn't that what we do? Isn't that human nature to try to separate ourselves from our sin and justify the actions? I wouldn't have done that if you didn't do that. I mean, am I right? I remember one time my son swung at Jocelyn. It's the only time that I put Jeremiah on the ground. And he swung at her, and he missed her like by this much, and I heard the wind off of it. And when I turned around, he said, if she wouldn't have mouthed off, I wouldn't have done that. And my response was, if you wouldn't have done that, then I wouldn't have done that. We see these family dynamics all the time. It's just no different. You know what I'm saying? I can't tell you how many times my kids aren't that way now, but when they were younger and they were growing up and they were mouthy, I remember hearing my boys, my oldest, usually my oldest, and if anybody was in church here with me 6 years ago, you'll know that I brought a very, very rebellious teenager with me. He would say, your daughter's up here annoying me. He used to say that. Not my sister's doing this, it would be your daughter, because in that same way. How do we do that? We separate ourselves from the reaction or the reaction of those circumstances. So then I get to justify and not have to carry the guilt. But it doesn't take away the guilt, does it? It it does something that worse, it buries it down. And we wonder why so many people today in the world have three emotions: happy, sad, and Hulk. So, what do you think about this? Anybody? Yeah. if if they would have had CR as a program, that's funny. That's okay. I think that because of like the generational curses have fallen down. We talked about that, about how Isaac does the same thing that his dad done, and how Jacob and Esau are doing similar things, and now Jacob is done these things, and now the curses of him is coming down the line, and eventually it's going to break. You know, one of the things that I will fully, well, there's a lot of things I agree with Jerry on fully 100%, but one of the things in the last 6 years, like one of the most profound things he's ever said to me was the reason why God chose, or he said, I'm convinced, I'll make sure I'm right here, because it's his opinion, not the truth, that the reason why God chose the Israelite people is because of their stubbornness. If he could save them, he could save anybody. And that's what's happening here is you get that generational curse after generation after generation. So father does this, son does the same thing. But they're only doing what they're taught. You know, yeah. Yeah. Yes. So to answer the question that you're asking me, next week we'll talk about the spiritual aspect of what, well, you can watch it, but the spiritual aspect of a generational curse. Because what we're seeing here is, think about what Jesus says. He makes it very clear on how a son learns. I can only do what I see my Father do, right? So Jesus is saying, I see what my Father in heaven is doing, so therefore I do what my Father in heaven has done. And in the same way, his sons get to say, I'm only doing what Dad taught us. It is. Which is the first sin after the initial sin, if you remember right. Because the very first thing that Adam does is he shirks off his responsibilities. So 33 here we get Israel or Jacob. He says he identified it and said, it is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his garments, just as Reuben had done. He put sackcloth on his loins, and he mourned his son many days. Now, mourning was normal. This is like a normal mourning period. However, Jacob goes into excessiveness. In 35, it says, all of his sons and all of his daughters rose up to comfort him. So, and what this is saying here is all of his daughters is talking about his daughter-in-laws. They rose up to comfort him, but because he only had one daughter, I just want to be clear there. But he refused to be comforted and said, no, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning. I refuse to stop. Thus his father wept for him. And meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. And we're going to end it there. Questions, thoughts, concerns? Anything to add? Yeah. They don't have it doesn't I don't see a funeral for Joseph. Like it doesn't talk about one. It's not that they wouldn't have had some sort of remembrance, but the way this is laid out is like Jacob decides I'm going into a lifetime of mourning. It's excessive. And I get it. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I'm saying that it's excessive. He is. So, yes, he is. Not to jump ahead, but I'll throw this in here now, is when the 10 go back for Benjamin, they make that knowledge known to Joseph then. They don't know that's Joseph. About our father will literally die if he loses another one. Because, and it's kind of like the way they laid that out, is we thought we were going to take his affection, but all we did was put him into a perpetual place of mourning. So, that's what they did. I mean, you're all in it together. Yeah. I mean, now you're 10 on 10. I mean, not these guys. And, well, I mean, think about next week, Louis. I mean, I don't want to jump into 38 too much, but think about this. I mean, Judah's willing to let his daughter-in-law go to be stoned, and I mean, he's willing to let her go all the way to death before she says, "Here's here's your staff, and I'm looking for payment." So in your cord. So I mean, they're messed up. They're broken. And they are stubborn and stiff-necked. That's right. Well, I mean, think about it like, yeah, I mean, you can't, I mean, he couldn't tell the difference between Joseph's blood and a goat's blood. And at this point in time, there's no supermarkets, there's no police stations, there's no, I mean, they don't trust civilization, and civilization ain't going to trust them. So, I mean, all they have is each other. And you think about this, like I said when I read that, I don't know if this happened out of earshot of the slaves, or the slaves were loyal to the brothers and they weren't going to break their loyalty either, because, they literally send the robe back with the servant or slave. So, I mean, it's not even just like the 11. It could be like 11 plus a group of others. I mean, you could have 20 people that's all involved in this conspiracy. And the realization is that if they're found out, there's going to be consequences to pay, because Jacob is still powerful. I mean, he still has a household, right? And he literally is over his household. He's got servants and armed army, and yeah. I mean, so you be quiet, or dad's going to get all the mercenaries together and take his wrath out on all of us, and he'll just have Benjamin, because he's too little to be there. So, I mean, this is pretty screwed up. And it's building up for the redemption that we all know will come. So, all right, anything else? Forgot to change that slide. Yeah, yeah. Next week we're going to talk about "O Judah." "O Judah." So one chapter next week, because it's some tough conversation. So, all right. right, let's pray. Lord, we're thankful. I'm thankful that you worked in their lives, because I know that seeing you work in their lives gives me hope and understanding that you'll work in mine. Lord, I ask that you would continue to enlighten us with Genesis. Lord, I ask that you would just help us to see things as you've seen them. Help us to understand what you were doing so that we can learn from who you are. Lord, I'm thankful for every person that was here. I'm thankful for this study. I'm thankful that you always use our mess to make a message, and you do not waste a hurt. We give you praise, we give you glory.